from Kaivalyadham and Archis, Kolkata. We are fortunate to have amongst us a very distinguished speaker who is a scholar for excellence. He is an authority in scriptures. We welcome Swami Atma Shraddhanandji Maharaj, the Secretary of Ramakrishna Mission, Ashram, Kanpur, Uttar Pradesh. Swami Atma Shraddhananda Maharaj Ji joined the Ramakrishna monastic order in 1989 at its Bangalore center and received his final sannyasa vows in 1999. He spent 13 years at Bangalore and Mysore centers for Ramakrishna Mutt, besides 2 years at Belur Mutt. From 2004 to 2016, he was in Chennai Ramakrishna Mutt, where he was the editor of the Vedanta Kesari, a cultural and spiritual monthly for over the century. He has edited, translated, and authored a couple of books on some aspects of spiritual life, Indian culture, and higher values. For 12 years, he was the guide for the Vivekananda Study Circle at IIT Madras, where he used to conduct a Sunday class for the study circle. For about 2 years, he was one of the monastic guide and instructors at the monastic Praveshan Training Center and Ramakrishna Matha, Belur Matha, near Kolkata in West Bengal. I request respected Swamiji to deliver his speech.
Namaste, and thank you for your invitation to share my ideas on Swami Vivekananda, and my greetings to all the participants. I'm glad that we are here, although we are located in different geographical locations. We are able to join and have what we call as satsang, a holy discussion or a holy company. So I'll be sharing some thoughts with you on Swami Vivekananda's yoga teachings. But before I actually get into the subject of Swamiji's yoga message or yoga teachings, I would like to give a bit of the background of Swami Vivekananda, his life, his personality, his achievements, and what he stands for us. So actually this also is important because we are just a few days away from, or rather on 12th of January was his birthday. And it is celebrated or observed across India as National Youth Day. This National Youth Day is so declared by the government of India around 4 decades back, in 1980s, mid-80s. And since then, various youth groups and educational institutions and the institutions which are related to Swamiji, like Ramakrishna Mission, from where I come, and Vivekananda Kendra, and a number of other institutions, they observe this by holding meetings, seminars, discussions, calling the youth, and how Swami Vivekananda spoke of his message, especially focusing on the enormous potential of the youth and their role in building up their own life and role in nation building. So this is about Swamiji's present day, the way he is known and the way he is celebrated in India. Besides this, let's go back to his biographical details, because it will help us understand what he has to teach us also. So Swamiji was born in 1863 in a fairly aristocratic family in Kolkata, in central Kolkata. The house where he was born is now preserved as a memorial. It was obtained by the Ramakrishna Mission around 20 years back. And around 15 years back, the then President of India, Dr. Abdul Kalam, went and inaugurated the renovated structure. So it's a memorial right in the heart of the city. It's called the Ancestral House of Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji's father was a well-known attorney or lawyer of his times, and his mother was a very devoted housewife. He had two younger brothers and some sisters, and he was very devoted to his parents. But then to begin with, he was also, as a little child, he was very curious and very mischievous too. So one of the games which he would play as a child is, in his language, called meditation game. As a little child, maybe 4 years or so, once it is reported in his biography that he was meditating in his house. The house is a fairly large house. So on the first floor or so, he was meditating with his other friends. And they had closed their eyes and they were meditating. That was their play. Very unlikely, or unlike today's many of the young people, they're just busy with the computer games. And he was, busy with the meditation game. And it was found that after some time that somewhere a black cobra had slithered in. And all the children, they were so frightened and they shrieked and went about. But this little boy, who was to become later Swami Vivekananda, he continued to meditate. As if nothing had happened. Then when the parents learned of it, he came up, especially his mother and others at home, and they saw this, they said as if nothing had happened. He was immersed in meditation, and the cobra went away after some time. And the boy opened his eyes. They said, "Dari, were you not afraid?" He said, "Of whom?" He was not aware that there was a cobra. So this speaks of his some extraordinary gifts he was born with to meditate. Later on, when he met in his late teens, when he was a young man, he met Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna, this is a long story. So he asked him, when you sleep, do you see a light in between your eyebrows? That is, when he was a little boy, every day before going to bed, he used to see a light in the middle of his eyebrows, and that light, like a circle, then that broadening circle, and it will engulf everything, and he will sleep. And when Sri Ramakrishna asked him, he thought every child slept like that. When Sri Ramakrishna asked him, "Do you see that?" He said, "Yes." So, that's a sign of a man who is perfect in meditation. It's known as Dhyana Siddha. He was a Dhyana Siddha too. But then before coming to this, when there are various ups and downs, as a young man, he was a very voracious reader. He read through all the philosophical books which were available, particularly the Western philosophy. He was very well read. He could raise some very mature questions about philosophical issues. And later, somehow, it came in his mind whether all this philosophy and all this discussion that's happening, whether it is worth, whether there is a reality behind all this changing thing, and whether we could deposit our faith with them. And that's the point. So he started his journey towards what we call the mystical presence of God, whether there is a God. He started asking. And he asked various people. Calcutta was the capital of India in those days. So there were many intellectuals and reform movement leaders. And he met some of them and asked them whether they had seen God. But none of them gave a very direct answer to his question. So he was a bit disappointed as he is not able to get anyone who could tell him, yes, there is a God, and I have seen him. At that time, during the college days, his teacher, who was teaching English, told him while he was teaching Wordsworth's poem called Excursions, he told him that this poem is written in a very high state of mind, and only somebody who has attained that state can speak this way. And in the present times, there is only one person who seems to have experienced that state. We call it a state of samadhi, and his name is Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So he lives in the temple of Dakshineshwar in Kolkata. It's a Kali temple right on the banks of Ganga. It's a beautiful place. Now also it's a bustling place. So anyone going to Calcutta can visit that. So well, he went to Sri Ramakrishna. That's how he went to Sri Ramakrishna. And he straightforward asked him the question, "Sir, have you seen God?" And Sri Ramakrishna gave him the answer in the same straightforward manner. "Yes, I have seen God. And I see him more clearly than possibly that what you see through your eyes." But then he added a rider. He said, "But who wants God? People want success in life. They want money, they want their wives, children, and property and career. Who wants God? So only those who want God will be able to get God." So that was something very startling for him. And then began many years of close interaction with Sri Ramakrishna. And in fact, he doubted his own Guru also many times. Before he accepted him as Guru, he discussed many things. They kind of tested each other. Sri Ramakrishna would ask him questions. Sometimes he would test whether he really is keenly interested in spiritual life. And he would test his teacher or would-be teacher very well. I'll give you two instances of that. Say, once, Sri Ramakrishna, you would find it difficult to believe, but this is what the book says, and we thoroughly trust the book. The Sri Ramakrishna could not touch any metal thing, because in those days, money was all metal. Money means there were coins and all that. So he just could not touch any money. He could not touch metal. So if he touches the metal, his hand will coil off, as if he has touched something which was very unpleasant. That was because he practiced extreme form of renunciation. He believed in that, and he practiced that, giving up money and greed, and running after any sensory pleasures. So Swami Vivekananda was a young, educated boy from the university. So naturally, he wanted to test whether it is a genuine thing or whether he's trying to put up a show before us. So one day what he did, he went to Dakshineshwar, and Sri Ramakrishna was not in his room, and he had his wooden plank on which he used to sit, and there was a small mattress on that. He quietly took a coin and put it beneath the mattress, thinking, let me see what's the reaction. And when Sri Ramakrishna came back, he sat on that. As soon as he sat on it, he just jumped off with a start, saying as if there is some, like you are bitten by a scorpion. So then they checked up, and there was a coin. He understood. He looked at young Naren, as he was called. Swami Vivekananda as a young man is called Naren. Oh, very good. So you're testing what you are going to take. Very good. Again, Sri Ramakrishna would test him. So one day, when young Naren came, Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of him. But when he came there, he just turned his face away. He didn't talk to him. He couldn't understand why he didn't talk to me, why he showed so much of displeasure. Anyway, after some time, he came again the same way. It went on for many days, about 15 days. Then one day, after 15 days, Sri Ramakrishna turns to him and said, "You see, I don't talk to you. I turn my face away when you come. Why do you still come here? To which Naren replied, well, whether you talk to me or not, I love you. That's why I come here. That's it. So that Sri Ramakrishna was deeply pleased by it. So there was a genuine relation between the teacher and the student. And there were many mystical experiences that took place there. Krishna was reported that Naren is meditating. Before that, he had initiated him into certain practices. He had also given him a mantra diksha, and he would, give him a very close guidance as to what is spiritual, how to progress spiritually. So one day it was reported to him that Naren is sitting in meditation, and possibly he has passed away because he's not breathing. Then Sri Ramakrishna smiled and said, oh no, he is in samadhi. Good that he got it. That he had been pestering me for it for long. Fine that he got it. Then after some time, when Naren did come back from that higher state, Sri Ramakrishna is supposed to have asked him, what do you want? He said, I always want to remain immersed in that state. And now and then I would open my eyes, have some food, and again be immersed in that state of blissfulness. To which Sri Ramakrishna showed displeasure and said, what? I thought you were a great people tree, a great tree which, which can shelter many people under it. Which means I thought you will do a lot of good to the people. But you have become so small that you want only your happiness? No, you are here to help others. So that was a new revelation to Naren, that I'm not just to seek my own samadhi and my own inner joy, I must be of service to others. Then, of course, Sri Ramakrishna passed away in 1886, and Naren, although he had trying circumstances at home, one incident I will mention in between. Naren had no faith in the image worship. He said Sri Ramakrishna worshipped images. Of course, the image worship is, strictly speaking, the term image worship isn't very faithful translation, because the term is Murti Puja or Pratika Upasana. So the image is only a pratika, only a symbol of the divine reality. So it's not just worshipping some stone. You don't worship a paper. You don't worship a piece of wood. You worship that as a symbol of some divine being. Anyway, he didn't worship because he believed in the Brahmo Samaj doctrine. So Brahmo Samaj was a reform movement of those days. But one day it so happened, when he was a young man, his father passed away. There were so many difficulties at home with regard to the basic necessities. So he went to Sri Ramakrishna and said, you see, you pray to the Divine Mother. So we pray to the Divine Mother Kali, whose image is here in the temple. Please pray to her to let all my problems be solved. To which Naren, Sri Ramakrishna said, well, I need not be a media person in between. You yourself can directly go and pray to Mother. Come on, let us go to Mother's shrine. So he took him to Mother's shrine and asked him to go and pray. But when he went inside, instead of praying for, praying for that her grace be there, that all his material needs be done, be overcome, rather he started praying, oh Mother, give me pure love for your holy feet, give me renunciation, give me dispassion, give me purity. May I have all the divine qualities, may I have infinite love for you. Vivek, Vairagya, and all that. And he came back. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, so did you pray what you wanted? Mischievously. He said, well, no, I forgot about it. Then go and pray again. So young Naren went and prayed again, and same again he forgot. And again he prayed for the similar things. And third time again Sri Ramakrishna sent him. Again he could not pray for anything material, anything worldly. Then Sri Ramakrishna said, you see, you are not born to ask anything material or worldly. So anyway, all your basic needs at home will be fulfilled. So that was a big moment of inner spiritual conversion for Swami Vivekananda. He turned into a great believer of the presence of the Divine Mother. So in 1886, when Sri Ramakrishna passed away, Swami Vivekananda, who was Naren at that time, he, along with his friend, with his brother disciples, they took the vows of monasticism. They left home and they were living in a very dilapidated building in Kolkata. It was called the Baranagar Mutt. And they led a great life of renunciation and tapasya there. They would be immersed in long hours of meditation and devotional singing, and sometimes doing japa, sometimes reading scriptures. It was very intense life there. And in those times, they did not have enough to eat also, because they were not having that much of support. But anyway, he spent more than a year like that, and then sometimes after the sannyas and all that, he went on he was driven by an inner urge to go around various places of pilgrimage in India, and also to move around and see the country. So for about 6 to 7 years, till 1893, he went to, let's say, he started from Kolkata by train. He came to Kashi, he spent some time, then he went further to Meerut, then to Haridwar, to Himalayas. There are 2 or 3 caves in the Himalayas, and now they are preserved to some extent, where Swamiji went and meditated. But there was, as he would sit for meditation for some days, there'll be some power which will drag him out, as if he had some mission to complete. He would meditate, and he was a dhyana siddha, as we said in the beginning, and Sri Ramakrishna had seen him experiencing the highest samadhi, but there was some power as if which will drag him out to the word, yes, you have something to do. Anyway, he went to Rajasthan, Maharashtra, then down to southern states, finally to Kanyakumari. In Kanyakumari, there's a temple of Mother Kanyakumari, that's this Divine Mother as a young lady, as a Kanya. And it is right on the seashore, and 3 seas meet there. It's a picturesque place. And there in the middle of the river, on the sea, about half a kilometer inside the sea, there's a large stone or large rock. Swamiji swam across there and went there. It was a very, very, very challenging thing, because the place is filled with a lot of stones and sharks. Even today, no one swims there. It is considered very risky to go there. Swamiji swam through that and sat on the rock, and 3 days and night he was lost in meditation. It was a remarkable thing, because he had seen the India. We have some idea of India, but Swamiji had moved around, mixing with people, say 120 years back, moving around, and say there are rich people, poor people. There were many, local kings. He stayed with the kings. He stayed with the poor, sweepers, pandits, everywhere. He was so much respected. He was so much. People were amazed at his purity, as his brilliance, and as his spirituality. But he saw their poverty. He saw their misery. So he was deeply pained. He was a man of great heart. While he meditated, he learned. He was a constant learner also. He would study architecture on the way. He would study the various spiritual traditions in different states in India, and all that. But he had seen the terrible poverty of the people. So he thought, what should I do? In those 3 days, he thought very deeply, and finally arrived at this conclusion. The conclusion was that I will give my life for the good of others. And I will take the message of Indian spiritual traditions or India's spirituality to the West. In those days, a parliament of religion was being organized at Chicago to commemorate the 400 years of the founding of America. It was a big event, the President of America had signed a document for its celebration. And in that context, they had chosen Chicago to be the place where they will have World's Columbians exhibition. It's a huge exhibition that was set up there. And the achievements of the Western world, including scientific achievements or the progress in cultural and social spheres, all that would be displayed. So in that, as part of that Columbian exhibition, they organized a World Parliament of Religions. So this World Parliament of Religions was a part of that event, and it was first of its kind in the world history. So, but unfortunately, there was kind of a little of hidden agenda also. The hidden agenda was that many of the missionaries who were in that, were engaged in its organizing, they thought we will call people from different religions and prove to them that we are superior. So, well, but they sent invitation to different parts of the world and to India also. But you see, Hinduism, even now it's not that organized, but in those days it was still more not organized. So there was no response. Nor did Swamiji know about it, till his friends told him that yes, there is a place, there's a event, you please go and represent India and represent Hindus. So there were devotees in Madras, and there are 2 or 3 local kings, one in Rajasthan called Khetri, the Raja of Khetri, and the Raja of Mysore, and the Raja of Ramanathpuram. These 3 kings in their own way, and a number of devotees in Madras, they gave money, say around 3,000 rupees in those days. And that's how a ship was, it was booked, and he went to Bombay, and from there on May 31st, he boarded a ship to Chicago. There were no flights. We have to remind ourselves of that. And added to that, there were no phones. There was no. We had not entered the digital world, so he was ignorant of many things. He even did not know, like most of those who sent him there, that it would be very cold there. So he didn't have enough clothings to give him warmth. And he was the first Hindu monk to go there. Now, there is a meaning in saying this. I'll come to that. So Swamiji boarded the ship, which went nearly 1.5 months or 2 months of travel. Swamiji went to, the ship went first to Sri Lanka, then to China, to Malaysia, to Japan, then finally to Vancouver. And in Vancouver, he got down and took a train to Chicago. So that was the journey. On the ship, there was one interesting incident which I might mention here. The thing was that seeing his person, most of the time he would be in his cabin, but sometimes he'll go and be on the board. So there was Jamshedji Tata. You may have heard of the Tata group of companies now in India. So this is one of the most well-known company, the industrial house in India. So the founder was Jamshedji Tata. He was traveling, and he was a visionary industrialist, and who tried to not only run industry but also think of doing good to the country and to the people. Unlike many business people, he was a very different type of man. So he saw Swamiji, and they entered into a conversation. Later on, it was a very healthy, very beautiful conversation. He was very impressed with Swamiji's vast knowledge. And then he later on wrote a letter to Swamiji and said, that was some years later, he said, Swamiji, you may recall me, I was a co-passenger who was with you on that ship. And you had suggested that we should start some research, scientific research institutes in India. So now I have apportioned so much of money. I invite you to be its director. So we are going to start an institution. Of course, Swamiji declined that, but that institution is still running in Bangalore. It is known as Indian Institute of Sciences. It is the premier institution of its kind in India. So Swamiji reached Vancouver, from there to Chicago. Now he was completely new to the Western ways. He was a simple monk moving around the country, and suddenly he had to handle so much of money and formalities. And in those days, there was a lot of racial issues also. So he was not given place in most of the hotels, and because he was wearing that strange gown and a long gown, and a slash around it and a big uh, pagadi on the top. People they had never seen a monk. They had never seen a person dressed like that. Today it's difficult to believe, but then Swamiji has recorded in some of his letters that sometimes he was treated like a curio. Sometimes people will chase him. At some places they howled and a few people threw stones at him because they had never expected a person can dress like that. Well, Swamiji was in Chicago. To his surprise, he learned that the Chicago event will happen in September, and he had reached there in June or July. I think July he had reached there. So still 2 months were there. He visited the famous exhibition that was in progress, and then in order to save money, he went to another nearby city. There, because there was an acquaintance there, and there he met one very important person who was the professor of Greek in Harvard University. So they had a good conversation, and Swamiji is supposed to have said, "Look, I want to go and speak in the Parliament of Religions, but I have no credentials." To which that man is supposed to have said that, "Well, to ask you, Swami, your right to speak is like asking the sun its right to shine." And then he wrote a letter of introduction to the people who were organizing the parliament, said, "Here is a man who is more learned than all our learned people put together." Well, finally, Swamiji went to the parliament and he spoke there. He began his speech by saying, "Sisters and brothers of America." It was a short speech of maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but it was such a reaction or response from the people when he said "Sisters and brothers of America." The people got up, and for about 2 minutes there was a clap, and there was the cream of America was sitting there, more than 4,000 or 5,000 people. It was held in the Art Institute there. Swamiji later on gave a number of other talks there. That was the beginning of Vedanta movement or yoga movement in the West. Now I'm not going to go speak further about his life much. I'll just wind up saying that he spent about close to around 4 years there, and he went to England, he went to France. He visited more than 150 cities. He met hundreds of spiritual aspirants. In between, he spent a few months at Thousand Island Park in St. Lawrence River near New York. And he wrote a number of letters, and which are all published, most of it is published. And then poems and articles, and his lectures were recorded by the devotees or the people who they had, some become the admirers. So that's how we have his teachings with us. Later on in 1897, he went to India. He was given a royal welcome. He went across the country. His inspiring lectures roused the country. And after a year and a half, again, he came back to US. He was there for about 8-9 months. That was his second visit. And in 1897, he founded the Ramakrishna Mission, which is, in India and across, we had having our branches or centers in around 24 countries. And in India and abroad all put together, there are 220 plus centers. I am speaking from the Ramakrishna Mission, Kanpur. So we have a number of activities like spiritual and social activities. We'll come to that sometimes. So his going to America as a first monk is very important. It is he who introduced to the West his spiritual message of India. When later on again, Swamiji passed away in 1902 in July, Sometimes on the 4th of July, he was in Belur Math, the place which he founded. Anyone going to Kolkata can visit Belur Math. It's a very nice, beautiful place. It's the headquarters of the Ramakrishna Mission as well. Now, coming to his teachings, the yoga teachings of Swamiji. So we have spoken about his life, has given you a biographical sketch of him. Now coming to his teachings. Swamiji's teachings are spread over about 9 volumes. These writings are very powerful. They are basically based on his lectures, but a few are writings. He himself has written a few things. Swamiji's teachings can be broadly classified into 2. The teachings which he gave about Indian spiritual tradition of yoga and Vedanta in the West, when he went to US and England and in France, and the teachings which he gave when he came to India, which means his lectures. These lectures are known as lectures from Colombo to Almora, where he spoke of very profound philosophical issues and tried to harmonize them, and also gave a message to Indians, to his fellow brethren, to rise up and make progress in their lives, both material life as well as spiritual life. So these are 2 categories, you can say. Now, we are discussing here basically his yoga and Vedanta teachings. So I'll focus on that. Now, Swamiji gave a series of lectures on yoga. These are known as, there are 4 yogas he spoke about. So first, let's say Karma Yoga. He had about 8 lectures. And then also there is his lectures on Jnana Yoga. And Jnana Yoga lectures speak of the Vedanta tradition. And then his lectures on Raja Yoga, the lecture series which he gave on how to meditate. He also translated the Patanjali Yoga Sutras into English. Perhaps his was the first translation into English. Now there are a number of translations, and then thanks to YouTube, there are a number of lectures also. But then in those days, he was the first to translate into English. And then we have the Bhakti Yoga, his lectures on Bhakti tradition. So he has given lectures on all these 4 yogas. It was not a very systematic saying that now we are going to organize Bhakti Yoga lectures. He just came up with that idea, and later on these are made into books. Because he was a mystic. He was not though he was a scholar, but he was not an academic man who would sit down and say, here I am writing my philosophy. Though he had an idea that he would one day write a book on that. But he died very young. He was just 39 and a half when he passed away in 1902. So Swamiji's lectures contain basically his teachings. Let's come to what is he teaching? What are the basic things which he is presenting before us? One big central teaching of Swami Vivekananda is that he spoke of human beings as divine. Right in Chicago, when he spoke there, he used a beautiful word. He says, children of immortal bliss. And he says, I refuse to call you as sinners. You're all children of immortal bliss. Actually, he was translating from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Swamiji was an extraordinarily gifted intellectual. He had read the Upanishads and he remembered most of them verbatim. He could quote them line by line. His power of memorization or memory power was something very exceptional. One incident I would mention, it would be again very strange. When he was in Meerut, when he was moving around the country, in Meerut is a place in Uttar Pradesh, and he stayed for around 2 months there in a rented house nearby. There was a library close by, and one of his brother disciples would go to the library and pick up a book by Sir John Lubbock. I really do not know who was Sir John Lubbock, but there's a book by John Lubbock, and he would pick up a number of volumes. And Swamiji would read it in a day and return it. It was a volume. So the librarian there, he was an Englishman, he was surprised and amused. He said, how can somebody read a book in a day? And once or twice, when this happened, he asked his brother disciple, is Swamiji really reading the book? Or is he simply returning the book after seeing it? He reported this to Swamiji. So Swamiji next day accompanied him to the library and said, sir, I am reading the book. If you have any question from any of the volumes which I have read, I will be willing to answer. And the man thought it was a good game. So he took up the book and opened it at random and asked him some question. Swamiji not only answered, he quoted the whole passage verbatim. And he asked in other volumes there too. So it was something very extraordinary. So when he's speaking of the Upanishads, he actually quotes from the Upanishads. When he says, children of immortal bliss, he is quoting from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, where the Rishi says, Shunvantu Vishve Amritasya Putraha, Aye Dhamani Vishwani Tastuhu, Vedahametam Purusham Mahantam, Aditya Varna Tamasah Parastat, Tameva Viditva Timrutyumeti, Nanya Pantha Vidyate Ayanaya. This is a verse from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. As you know, there are a number of Upanishads. There is the 10 principal Upanishads and many minor Upanishads. And there are Upanishads which have later on been added. But Upanishads are the last portion of the Vedas. They are the Vedanta, Vedasya Antaha, which means the essence of the Veda, or the last portion of the Vedanta, of the Vedic philosophy. They speak of the Jnana portion. That is the knowledge about the self, knowledge about the essence of this word, knowledge about what is the nature of the self, and so on. So Swamiji quotes from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad saying that you are essentially children of immortal bliss. And we all have the capacity, we have the inherent strength to recognize our own divine self. He said that it may be that we make mistake, we slip, we start thinking we are body, we are mind. This is a mistake, that we think we are only body and mind. We forget that we are divine being too. In fact, we are self, which has a body and mind. It is not that we are body and mind and we have a self. It's the other way around. We have a self, we are a self, we are a spiritual entity, which is having this bodily experience. So this is what Swamiji even taught. And in his Jnana Yoga lectures, Swamiji dwelt at length upon what is the nature of the self. There are a number of lectures, say his one lecture called The Real Nature of Man, the real and apparent man, and realization. There are around 30 lectures about on this type. What is Maya? Swamiji calls Maya as the sum total of time-space causation. So he also gives an idea of how the concept of Maya grows. So suppose I say that I am divine, so why don't I realize my divinity? You say that I am pure consciousness, but why don't I recognize my pure consciousness? So it is said that it is because of a mysterious power called Maya. So Maya has been very difficult to put in English. Swamiji gave 2 or 3 lectures on that, and he always considered those lectures as his masterpieces. The reason being, you are trying to put a very difficult Hindu idea into English, where this concept does not exist. So he had to struggle to put the right way. He could put it across to a mind which has not known this. So Maya, he could be said to be magic or illusion or delusion, but it is something more than that. It is half truth, but yet not full untruth. So It's a power which is difficult to explain, but we all undergo this. We forget our divine nature. Now, when you say that there is divinity in all, that all of us are divine, how do you explain the evil in the life? This is one of the questions we all have before us. That there is divinity, fine, but what about a person who is, let's say, a criminal? Or a person who is definitely engaged in extremely violent and harmful thinking and acts? How do you explain him? Is he also divine? There is divinity in him too. Swami Vivekananda said yes, but it's just like the manifestation of the divinity in that case is extremely poor. So you just say for instance, there are kerosene lamps in India, laltain as it is called here. So you light a lantern and you have fill up its tank with kerosene oil, and you have a flame, you light it up, and as you light it, it emits smoke. It emits the carbon monoxide, which goes and settles down on the chimney. And then chimney becomes dark enough not to allow the light to be emitted out. Then you take a piece of cloth, you take a cotton or a tissue paper and clean it up. So the light which was not emitting becomes bright again. In the same way, human beings whom we call as evil, as bad, as criminal, as people filled with all kinds of anti-social, anti-human activities or thinking, are the people whose minds are extremely impure, which means they have become so much attached to the senses, to the bodily pleasures, to their ego, to their desires for their self-aggrandizement, that they have forgotten their divine self. So what's the whole thing? Swami Vivekananda's central message was to purify the mind and manifest that divinity that is within us. He said that we have this divinity within us. It is inherent. Like you see in milk, you have got the butter which is inherent in it. So what you have to do with the milk? You have to make it into curd, and then you have to churn it, and the milk will reveal its butterness. The same way we have the divinity within us, but we'll have to make our mind pure, free from all these Arishadavargas. So Arishadavargas is a Sanskrit term meaning six enemies of mind. Like you have the Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsaryam, which means you have the anger, you have greed, you have jealousy, you have got lustful drive, you have got a lot of ego. All this should be driven out. Then only your mind becomes pure and you start manifesting your divine nature fully. Now, this is one central message, but then how do we attain that? This is a message of the Vedanta. Swamiji quoted from the Kathopanishad as well. In Kathopanishad, Swamiji speaks of, he likes this human body. He quotes from the middle of the Upanishad where he says, Atmanam Rachinam Vidhi. That to think of this body as a chariot. This is a central teaching of the yoga, or Yoga Vedanta rather. That think of yourself as a chariot with the horses. Let's say there are 5 horses representing 5 senses. And the chariot is being driven by the driver, who is the buddhi, our intellect. Intellect is holding on to the senses through reins called mind. So senses are the horses. These horses are running on their objects of senses. So objects of senses, see the rishis of India always try to summarize things, to generalize things. So we say we have so many experiences. All of us experience this word. So how do you speak about these experiences? They say all your experiences can be put into these 5 categories. What are these 5 categories? Sensory categories. So we have the 5 senses. So they say the senses and the objects of senses. What is objects of senses? The eyes is a sense organ, and it has got an object, which means it is its area of perception. So what is the area of perception of the eye? It is a rupa, or form. So what is the area of perception of the ear? It is shabda, which means it is the sound. What is the area of perception of nose? Say it is smell. What is the area of perception of the skin? It is touch. What is the area of perception of the mouth? Say it is taste. So you have these 5 senses and their objects of senses. Now, if you think of the human mind, human personality as a ratha or a chariot, think of these 5 senses as the horses, which are being controlled by the reins or the rope through their nose. That reins are the mind. And the mind is in the hands of the buddhi. He is the driver. And inside is sitting the jivatman, or ego is sitting there. And we are running this life. So that's Swamiji quotes in his famous lectures on realization from the Kathopanishad. So human personality, we just now referred to purity of mind as the central goal of all yoga and Vedanta teachings. How to purify the mind, which means how to remove all its baser, subtle attachments and likes and dislikes. In the yoga tradition, you have the raga, dvesha, ityadi. They are considered the basic attachments. So Swamiji spoke of that. As I said, he spoke of the Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga book has got many insights. Swamiji's insights in the Yoga Sutras. Remarkable insights are there. His 8 lectures at the beginning of the Raja Yoga, before he translates that into it, he goes in details as to what is human mind and what is prana and what is akasha. These 2 basic things he takes up there. So he says that if you consider yourself as a chariot who is being driven by the buddhi, so what's the basic thing that we have to do? To purify or train the buddhi. Buddhi means our power of determination. So this takes us to the idea of self-control. Swamiji speaks of that. He says that self-control, he says the people in Raja Yoga lectures, Swamiji mentions this. People say that don't steal, don't tell lie, don't be this, don't be doing anything wrong. But nobody tells you how not to do this. I feel interested in doing something wrong. Why do I feel interested in that? So I should go deep into my own mind from where this urge is coming. So let us study our mind. Their desires are there. From where these desires are rising? Where these impulses are rising? So he speaks of meditation as one of the practices through which you can purify the mind. But then meditation should always be preceded and accompanied by the moral purification, what we call in the Ashtanga Yoga as yama and niyama. There are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. This yama and niyama are very essential basis of any meditative practice anywhere. Patanjali, while explaining these, he says, Etehe sarvabhauma mahavrataha. These are the 5 universal vows. What are these vows? One is you have got truthfulness, you have non-violence, you have chastity, you have non-stealing, you have non-possessiveness. So these are the things which prepare the mind for higher meditation. But then, Swamiji was a little different yogi, you can say, who also brought into picture not only the meditative practice, which we are discussing, and also the Vedanta view of life, where you speak of the divinity of man, but he also spoke of Karma Yoga, doing action without any attachment. Now, all of these yogas require a long treatment of study and how do we analyze it. But Karma Yoga is basically the yoga where you train up your willpower so that it doesn't get attached to the fruits of action. But for that, you build up a philosophy. You have a philosophy for that. Why should I not be attached to the fruits of action when the fruits of action are coming? Why should I not be attached? Because that attachment will bring pain in its train. Pain will come alongside that, alongside that seeking. All Swamiji's Karma Yoga lectures and a few smaller lectures on Karma Yoga, they speak of this. Swamiji says, we suffer because of attachment, because of expectation. If we give up expectation and attachment, even while we are working, even we may not be even meditating, we will become unselfish. And that unselfishness is the core of spirituality. So that core of spirituality lies in letting the lower self go. So you have this Karma Yoga philosophy with us, the philosophy which manifests through action, through willpower. Then you have the Bhakti Yoga. Swami Vivekananda spoke of the combination of 4 yogas. So we have the Jnana Yoga, we have Raja Yoga, we have the Karma Yoga, and finally the Bhakti Yoga. The Bhakti Yoga means I perceive the ultimate reality as a person. So somebody who is a worshipper of Rama or a worshipper of Christ or a worshipper of any other forms in which he worships God. But if he worships that image without any expectation for personal enjoyment, but he worships it only with the pure love that he seeks from God. He is dependent on God. We find this in the Bhagavad Gita. Swamiji has given a number of lectures in the Gita. He would quote from Gita quite often during his lectures. And Gita and Upanishads, these 2 things you will find repeatedly being cited in his teachings. Another very important part of his teachings, which along with the Bhakti and these 4 yogas I spoke of, is the development of strength. He spoke of strength. He called it as weakness is death, strength is life. So strength is very important, both physical strength as well as mental strength and spiritual strength. So he emphasized on this very much, and finally he spoke of service. Service to man as service to God. So when you unselfishly serve others, that too leads to the purification of mind, which is the goal of yoga. The goal of yoga, as we all know, is to reach our own divine self. The beginning of the yoga philosophy, we have yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga means calming down of the mind, controlling all the chitta vrittis, the waves of thoughts that are coming in us. But the next few sutras, they tell a very profound truth. It says once you control the waves in your mind, what do you find when the mind has become completely quiet? You discover your own divine self beneath it. Tada drushtuhu swarupe avasthanam. It's not that you're creating the self. It is not that the self is absent. It's only not visible to you because of the restlessness of the mind. And this restlessness goes away when the mind becomes pure and unselfish. So that's the basic philosophy of life which Swamiji has given us. So the yoga teachings of Swami Vivekananda have been separately compiled as a book too. Though his teachings are scattered through his writings of 9 volumes, about 25 years back, in 1993 or so, 1993, around 30 or 40 disciples or followers of Swamiji across America they made a committee and they selected certain yoga teachings of Swamiji and brought it out as a separate book. It is called Living at the Source. Living at the Source. So I would suggest you to please do get that book. And above all, Swamiji's famous book, The Raj Yoga. I think Raj Yoga is available online. You can download it with a click of the button. But living at the source, you may have to buy or order it from the Advaita Ashrama in Kolkata. So this basic teachings of Swamiji about consciousness is, about Vedanta and about yoga is, that man is essentially divine, man is essentially consciousness, but we do not experience it because of a covering on our mind, the covering on our the chitta, and that has to be purified through any of these four yogas. Swamiji called it, we call it as the Viveka Sutras. He says each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity by controlling nature, internal and external. Do this either by work, which means Karma Yoga, or work or philosophy, that is Jnana Yoga, or psychic control, which means the Raja Yoga, by one or two or all of these, and be free. So freedom is the goal of spiritual life or of religion, freedom. And finally he says, this is the whole of religion. Doctrines, dogmas, temple, churches, they're all secondary details. So this is what I thought I will share on this very happy occasion of Swamiji's birthday on 12th January. So I'm glad that I got this opportunity of sharing some details about him and giving a glimpses of his teachings to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maharaj, for your valuable speech. We are enriched by your inspiring words. Now I open the session for interaction. Kindly, if you have any query, you may kindly ask Maharaj. He will be happy to answer.
Namaste. Namaste.
Namaste.
Yeah, I have one confusion always, like they say that you should be detached. And when it comes to parents or when it comes to our children, my mother is not well, and if I'm not going to be attached to her, if I'm not going to take care of her, and or just be on service to her without any attachment, how will be her mental acceptance? Will she like it?
That's a very moot question that you have asked. That how do we practice a detachment? But then this is one thing which we find being advised by the Bhagavad Gita, by the Upanishads. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 15th chapter, we says, Asanga shastrena dridayena chitva. Take the shastra called asanga, detachment, and cut down the bondage which binds you to the world. So how do we do that? That's the point. How do we practice a detachment? I think what Sri Ramakrishna says is very good, very, very simple. He says that being detached means you should also be, on one side you're detached to the world, but you're also attached to God, your own divine self. So it doesn't mean that you become so terribly, heartless that you don't serve others. In fact, when we become detached, it's detachment to our ego, not to service, not to help others. The example of great ones, be it Buddha, be it Ramakrishna, or any of these great people, is that they were deeply concerned about others' welfare. Which means the detachment means that I am detached from my ego, my desires for enjoyment. But I have an attachment in the sense of that there is divinity in others. Say, let's say in case of your mother, there's a divinity in her and she's your mother and you need to serve her. And in the process of serving that you see divinity in her and try to serve her, there are also occasions when many unpleasant things happen. That's part of life. So that's called the poison part of life. So that too also we have to digest. But at the same time, we must remember that the basic fact of life. We also know that it is like one who is born, he will die. We don't have any say in the matter. So we have only to follow it up. This is what the final truth of life is, that one who assumes a body will one. Swamiji puts it this way: one who is composed will be decomposed. He puts it this way. So let us not be afraid of it, saying that, oh, I'm going to decompose. Don't worry. Your body is going to be decomposed. The divinity within you is never going to be decomposed.
Namaskar, Swamiji.
Namaste.
There is a question which is say prominent from the perspective of this particular course which we are undergoing. Is that the consciousness which is mentioned in the Hindu scriptures and the consciousness which is being inquired by the modern scientific inquiry on the effect on the brain, is it the same connotation? Is it the consciousness of the scientific one is same as the consciousness which is being inquired into by the ancient wisdom?
I think there's a difference. The difference is what we call as the consciousness that we perceive through the brain or which is in the brain. That's only a small part of the real consciousness. So it's like this. The term consciousness itself is understood, is interpreted by different perspectives. So for instance, we are conscious of something. We are okay. That's the one meaning of consciousness. But then consciousness in the Vedic term, it means that you also analyze the state of your mind. We speak of the three states of mind, like you have the Jagrata Avastha, you have the dream state, and you have the deep sleep state. So the deep sleep state is where we are very nearest to our consciousness, the divinity of our consciousness. But there is a veil of ignorance in between. In fact, what you have said, that there is a study in the scientific world, it's very true. These days, a lot of people are trying to understand this consciousness from the brain's angle. But then until there is a hardcore issue of the consciousness which has still not been solved, that who is experiencing all these things? Who is asking this question? Who am I? So until I think we will have to come out of the five senses paradigm of the science, and we'll have to accept the Atman side of our life. Until that happens, I don't think this will be solved fully. But I'm very happy that things are progressing very well. There is a famous book on consciousness, The Spectrum of Consciousness, by Wim Kelber, I think Ken Wilber, which is considered a big book on this particular subject. So there he discusses how that finer thing which is pervading, it's just like, so I have got a light here, and I've got this computer here, I've got one gadget there and one gadget there. All these are being operated by electricity, but they are not electricity. So electricity is being seen as a white light here because of the medium. Electricity is seen as a heater there because the equipment is meant for that. So the essential thing is consciousness. So the brain is also one instrument through which this consciousness is manifesting. So it's a very profound thing. So the more our mind becomes purer, that's why I'll come back to that again and again, that the more mind becomes purer, the more we are able to see the purity of our being. How we are so different from the suffering that comes by attachment to body and mind.
How the ego gets entangled, catching impressions from the outer world and
Yes.
the chitta, and how to disentangle that and
So how do we disentangle? See, one is the path of vichara. There are basically two paths. One is path of vichara, but vichara must be accompanied by vairagya, or what we call as development of virtues. Otherwise, vichara, we might be able to talk big things, but we are not able to progress much. So practice of virtue, which means practice of certain spiritual practices too. So Acharya Shankara, Adi Shankaracharya, in the 12th chapter of the Gita, his Bhashya, he mentions that a person should be doing upasana regularly. Then only he will be able to develop a sharp mind to understand his own divine nature. So what is meant by upasana? He says upasana of repeatedly focusing your mind on a divine form. Repeatedly focusing your mind on a divine form. So we have so many kinds of divine form. You go on trying to focus and again, oh, how does it going to matter? It's just like sharpening the knife. In one go, it may not get sharpened. We go on sharpening by doing it. So purification of mind takes place through either detached action, or by this vichara, by bhakti, or by practice of puja even, any of these things, or deep thinking, analysis. Why am I suffering? Why there is, who is suffering? Who is that? Am I the subtle body, or am I the gross body, or I am beyond all the subtle, gross and the causal body? So that's how we finally reach to that particular understanding.
Swamiji, one question. See, when we are all supposed to, from the brahmacharya to the grahastha to the vanaprastha, you are supposed to sort of transform ourselves over a period of time. And how does this happen in practice again? Because when you are wanting to go to a vanaprastha state or something, so you have family entanglements, whether it's in the form of a son or a daughter or somebody. So if they are, let's say, suffering for health reason or whatever it may be, is it wrong for us to not to think about it and say that I have come to vanaprastha, forget about it, it is your karma, you do whatever you feel like, or you start worrying about it? If you start worrying about it, whether does it help really?
Surely worry does not help. But what really helps is a concern for them. Concern is different from worry. But vanaprastha, whether it is these four ashramas we speak of, the brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprastha and sannyasa, what we understand is they are the four psychological stages of mankind. So the first stage is the state of self-control and discipline, brahmacharya. Then you have the grahastha, where you generate wealth and you enjoy the legitimate enjoyments of life. But that too also has got a limitation, because body has its time. And now life has got its time. So now I need to retire. I need to withdraw. So one of our Swamijis used to put it this way: just as there is a sunrise, there is the rising part of the day, there is also the sunset, the declining part of the day. If this is day, our life is like a day. So we are in the declining side of the day. That has its beauty. So declining sun too has its own beauty. Now the point is, these stages, the final stages, so the goal kept before mankind by the Hindu rishis is sannyasa. But then, it is not meant to be given to all right at the beginning to take up to sannyasa. In the Mundaka Upanishad, there is a verse which says, Parikshalokan karmachitan brahmanam Nirvedamaya nasti asti kritena. Sagurumeva bigacheta samitpani shotriya brahmanishtam. Meaning, at first we have to examine what this word can give us. Pariksha lokan. What word can give us? It can give us happiness. But is this happiness eternal or is it evanescent? If it is evanescent, which is what it is, let us look for that which is behind this evanescence. So, Pariksha Lokan. In fact, the scriptures take us further. They say that whatever is attainable by human beings, whether in this life or after life, say we believe in going to, say, Indraloka. We die and go to, see, science ends there. Science cannot explain about what lies beyond death. With all its wonderful things, because science is basically involved with the five senses. With all due respect to scientists, I find there are limitations, a lot of limitations. So there is a Indraloka. We don't know whether it is there or not. But anyway, let me go. I'll go there. Scripture says even that is not our goal. Why? Because if you go to Indraloka, you will have certain karma which have taken you there, and the karma, once it gets exhausted, you will again come back to this earth. Kshine punya martya loke vishanti. Again, you will have to struggle. You will have to struggle to attain the highest. Again, you have to come back to the earth again. That's what our scriptures say. Now, your question was very pinpointed, that if we have given up things, should we not be worried about them? As a human being, we should take care about them, whatever best we can, and pray for them, and become perfect examples of detachment too. I think that way we can be of great service to them when we don't interfere with them, but we are always there to support them. We're always there to help them. But they will also understand now things are progressing. We have to prepare ourselves for the final departure. That's the way of life. So I think these four stages are profound philosophical and psychological stages through which all of us pass through. So maybe, some people understand very early in life, and some people understand very late in life, and some people just don't understand.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste, Maharaj. I have a question. So you said that we have to still take care of our worldly duties, and we need to encourage and nurture empathy. It still has a hint of attachment to it, and my question is about Vairagya. When you said that Swamiji said that he wanted to stay in that state of samadhi or meditation, to some extent, it still was an attachment to that experience or a desire to be in that state. How did Swamiji get over that attachment of being in a particular state or having that experience? Because in the end, for a yogi also to reach Kaivalya, he has to overcome that attachment to that state of samadhi also.
So as I understand it, that hearts of people like Swami Vivekananda, like Buddha, or any of these whom we call as the great lights of the world, is filled with compassion. Sri Ramakrishna gives an example that a man wanted water. So he had to dug open a well. So he got certain implements. He started digging, and he got the water. An ordinary man would have thrown the implements and gone away, but he preserved them. Maybe it will be useful for others. So that's the kind of compassion man has. Another example Sri Ramakrishna gives. See, let's think of him. There was a mysterious enclosure. And there was a lot of joy inside emitting from that light it was emitting. But nobody was able to see what it is. Somebody will rise up, they will take a ladder and go and see. The moment they see that, they just jump in and they never come back. Only one person came back to tell what was inside. That is called a great sage. Others have experienced and gone merged in that. But there are some people who are filled with so much of compassion. They come back and they want to give to the humanity. So, although we might consider it as attachment, it does look like an attachment that he wants to come back and do something. But that attachment is, it's something which is very helpful to the large humanity. Today, what we are today is because of so-called attachment of the great rishis. The great Patanjali need not have written these sutras for us. He would have simply enjoyed himself, got the samadhi and disappeared. But he had compassion. So compassion is one of the characteristics of a person who has made a lot of inner progress. He wants to do something for others. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a mention about a verse where he says, there's one Rishi there, one Raja, he says that the Lord asks him, what's your prayer? He says, my prayer is that may I be able to enter into heart of anyone who is suffering and try to lessen his suffering. That was his prayer. So much of compassion. So compassion is different. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Daya and Maya, they are two different things. Maya is only for my dear ones, my family members, my friends. That is Daya, that is Maya. But Daya is for everyone. So there are no boundaries of his mind, then only I will take care. Even the subtle attachments are not there. Intense compassion for mankind. So although a person attains Kaivalya, but he has that compassion, he comes back to give that knowledge to others.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Swamiji, there is one more question.
Yes.
Sir, Swamiji, like you mentioned, spectrum of consciousness of Ken Wilber, and what is fascinating nowadays to these current contemporary scientific community is remote healing, teleporting, the abilities which were comfortably possible by the ancient Indian sages, and what we keep on hearing in our religious books, and the possibility of these things into, say, more contemporary understanding of the possibility or the actuality of it. That is what is bothering the whole, the scientific inquiry goes on to those directions. First of all, I would like to know whether actually these things do happen. This teleporting, remote healing, these are two very fascinating things, whether it is pranic healing nowadays or the possibility of teleporting. Are these realities?
So they are real in the sense we live in this world, and they are real. As long as we are in this world, there are certain things which are real to us, just as breathing is real to us. The same way, Swamiji in his Rajoga lecture speaks of there's one continuum into which we are living. So like the sky is a continuous thing. The sky which I am touching by making a fist action like this, the same sky in which you are, although you may be a few hundred or 1,000 kilometers away, is the same sky. So similarly, we are interconnected at the mental level. So if I am taking care of the mental level at this end, it can definitely be transferred to the other end. So they say power of prayer means this, that I am taking care of a cosmic connection which all of us have. The Sanskrit word for the cosmic mind is Hiranyagarbha. So Hiranya is golden and Garbha is the womb. So our minds are all part of the golden womb. So it's the closest example is internet. So we are all connected, interconnected. If I've got a connection, if I don't have a connection, if I don't have a device, I can't connect to you. But Hiranyagarbha is one step ahead of internet, where everything is interconnected because we are in that. We are living in that. It is part of, there's a cosmic mind and there's a cosmic body, and we are all part of that cosmic body and cosmic mind. So there's a vast ocean of matter in which a small wave is called one Mr. X and another wave is called Mrs. X. This is all at the material level, so also at the mental level. So we can definitely we can travel. There's a thing called thought transference. We can transfer our thought to others. But then these things are only meant to strengthen our faith in the ultimate truth of our being. They are only considered to be kind of milestones. I mean, they're not a destination. The destination is our own, seeking our own divine self, and then being kind to others, being compassionate to others, serving others.
Maharaj ji, one question by Ramnarayan ji. What is mental strength and how can it be developed?
Mental strength.
Yes.
Mental strength, as I understand, is where you can withstand any pressure. In the 6th chapter of the Gita, Sri Krishna calls it as Tasmin sthite guruna apina vichalyate. Look at one very wonderful example of what is mental strength is from the life of Bhagavan Rama. Look at Lord Rama. So we know the story of Rama's life, that he was to become the king. It was announced that the coronation will take next day, but then his another mother. So he had his own mother, and there were two other mothers. The Kaikeyi so plays a role that he is not only not going to be coronated, he is being sent away to the forest for 14 years. So in both the cases, the composer of Ramcharitmanas says, in both the cases, he remains quiet. First, that he is being given coronation, he is just smiling, he's quiet. Then he said, no, you are not being given this. He remains peaceful and quiet. This equanimity is the source of strength. Now, equanimity comes from understanding the relative value of things around us. Relative values. So it is said of Alexander the Great, when he came to India and he was living in this story, Swami Vivekananda narrates that when he came to India and he was living in India, he had heard of the great knowers of Brahman, the rishis. So he told his people, I want to meet one such. Where is he available? Find out. So they went around and they tried to find, there's one person in the remote jungle. So he went to see him. But this man was lying on a big rock near a river. So, and he was full of joy, full of carefree joy. He was just dressed up with some few things, and he, as if a person has just returned after a big celebration, and he's full of bubbling with some peculiar inner presence and joy. So Alexander was very impressed. So he tells this man, I'm so happy to see you. I would wish that you come with me to Athens. I will keep you in my palace and I'll provide you all the things which you require. I'll give you a good life there. Come with me. The man says, well, I'm quite happy here, so I need not go with you. Now, why? What you are happy with? You see, here I am. I'm sitting under the sun, and if it rains, I go to the nearby cave. I'm happy there. And if I feel hungry, here there are fruits, I just pluck them and I take it. And if I want water and there is this river flowing, I take it. Those were the days when the rivers were not polluted. So I can simply go and take up the water. And so I'm quite happy here. Then Alexander tells him, no, but I'm ordering you to come with me. He said, when I'm happy here, why should I come with you? Then the ego of the king called Alexander rose up and said, if you don't come with me, if you don't listen to me, I'll take this sword and kill you. The man burst into a laughter. And that was a strange reaction. So he asked him, why? Why did you burst into laughter? He said, I never heard a greater lie than this. Because you can kill my body, but you can't kill me. I am that infinite being. I am that Satchidananda, Satchit Ananda, who was never born. Body will die, body will suffer. I will never suffer. So that was the kind of state he had reached. That is the mental strength. That's the highest kind of mental strength. In a more relative sense, when we hold on to something and we try to fulfill it, that's also an example of mental strength. There are three types of strength which are spoken of, which is one is called the Bahuvalam, the strength of the muscles or the physical strength, the Buddhi Valam, the strength of the intellect. Some people have got great intellectual strength. But another is the Atma Balam. So Atma Balam is two types. One is the Atma Balam of, let's say, I've got the moral strength. So somebody offers me money as a bribe, and I have the capacity to say, no, I don't want this because I've got some moral principles. So that's a moral strength, and that is Atma Balam. There's another kind of Atma Balam where I can withstand any amount of pressure and yet hold on to truth or what I consider as truth. So that comes only when a person has got tremendous faith and he exercises his viveka and he develops that inner strength. So it's not that this is restricted to a few people, or only monks can have that kind. It's open to all. This kind of strength is open to all. But I think the basic thing is we must have the capacity to give up that which is holding or creating us, making us weak. Swami Vivekananda, in his famous poem called The Song of the Sannyasin, he says, thine is the hand that holds on to the rope. If you let go, the rope goes off. So we are holding on to weakness, we are holding on to something wrong. If we let go, it goes off. But if we hold on to it and say, oh, I am being bound by the rope, well, it's a misnomer. So it requires a lot of inner viveka or the power of discernment to understand this. We can develop this. Another way of developing mental strength is to remind ourselves again and again that I am the self, I am divine. I am not going to be affected by the changes in the body and changes in the mind. I am something beyond it. In the Kathopanishad, the mind is compared, the Atman is compared to that, suppose my eye has got a defect. I can't see the sun. Does it mean there's a defect in the sun? There's no defect in the sun. The same way, my body and mind may have some defect, but there's no defect in me. I'm separate from it. So it's a kind of now we know now these days we call social distancing. So it is like the mental distancing from our own problems, from our own weaknesses. We become so attached to it that nobody, it's a funny example. With that, I'll close this answer. There's a thing which Swamiji has quoted in two places. It says there were two monks who were going on the banks of Ganga, somewhere near Haridwar. So it was cold, and one of them spotted a blanket flowing on the banks of on the waters of Ganga. So he knew swimming. He said, "Let me go and bring that." The other one stood there, and so he went in, and he caught hold of the blanket. Actually, it was not a blanket; it was a beer. It was a bear which had just flown away into the water. So the bear caught hold of this man. So both are now struggling inside. This man is not able to see the bear's face, who is on the banks. He says, "Arey, if you are not able to take that blanket, if it is too heavy, why are you struggling? You leave the blanket." He says, "Well, I am willing to leave the blanket, but blanket is not leaving me. Blanket is not leaving me," which means the bear has caught hold of me now. So sometimes it happens like that. We have caught hold of certain thing. We are not able to give it up. So only way is practice of detachment. Remind yourself your own divinity. Again and again, again and again. So do we have any more questions?
Guruji, I have one question.
Yes.
People say to do some upasana or practice. Some say it is some say one should do for 8 hours long meditation to reach divinity. So what is the moderate time to do upasana in a serious note?
I would not say that one person should ever try to get into 8 hours so quickly. Best way is to be regular, and maybe you meditate twice a day, in the morning and evening. You just keep some half an hour or 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. Then you build up a stamina. Then you can extend that meditation. But then again, if we try to meditate more than our capacity to meditate, it will rather heat up the brain, as it is said. It's not really a physical heating. It's called a heating of the brain. Means a person is trying to check his pranic shakti, which was flowing too violently. So there is a reaction. So let us not try to do anything in a very violent way. So one thing which we in the Ramakrishna Mission tradition or the Vedanta tradition speak of is that yoga should be accompanied by bhakti, so to say, which makes it easier to practice to attain the same goal as the yoga gives. So if a person takes up prayer, see, a devout Muslim prays 5 times a day. So 5 times, you take up the prayer 5 times, so 3 times. That is one thing, and that prayer will help you to develop inner stamina or inner thing to become nearer and nearer your own divine being. One thing is about the spiritual life is that it is a continuous affair. It is not something which it's a part-time job. It's a full-time job. That morning also I'm aware of God. After 2 hours also I'm aware of God. After 3 hours I'm aware of God, or aware of my own divine nature. There's a great Christian book called Practice of Presence of God. One of our great monks, Swami Vireshwaran, used to often quote that it's a very wonderful practice. Try to feel there is a God around you, within you, all through. The God is meant divinity. The God is meant all your own higher self. Calmness. God is of the nature of calmness. God is in the nature of purity. God is the nature of infinitude. So you try to feel that all around you. It's a great practice to do that. Or a repetition of God's name as much as possible. To whichever tradition you belong to. Suppose you belong to the Rama tradition, you go on repeating Rama, Rama, Rama. Or somebody belongs to Krishna tradition. These things are better than to sit for 8 hours of meditation.
But Guruji, I mean, let's say if I do chanting, I mean,
Yes.
I keep rolling the rosary beads, and I do chanting, but my mind chatters something else. So how to overcome that?
So nice. See, we need not be always doing there are 3 types of japa. One is the external japa, which you just now said, rolling the rosary. That is the one type. Another one is when you are not even counting it outside. Maybe you are just, it is known as upamshu, just making a small movement on your lips without making any sound. And the third one is mansika, which means you mentally are repeating God's name. Mentally you're repeating God's name. That has got more profound impact. So there are people who are so deeply into it that in case they meet with some kind of a accident, even then in that state they are repeating God's name because they have practiced it so much inside. There are people who have done it. So point is, maintain that awareness throughout the day. Awareness, whether it is through constant meditation or constant prayer or constant repetition of God's name. Say at the end of every work, so you start a work, suppose you have to write an article. At the beginning of the article, you repeat God's name. In the middle, if you find some time, repeat God's name. At the end, again, repeat God's name. So that way you sanctify and purify your every action.
Thank you, Swamiji. Very nicely you explained. We are running short of time. We shall request you again one day to enlighten us with his speech. And I extend my thanks to all of you. We are closing down the session, pronouncing Shanti Patha. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi.
Thank you very much. I take leave. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.